Good afternoon. It's 5 o'clock on Tuesday, December 15th, 2020. I'd like to call to order the Administration Committee meeting. Can we do a quick roll call, please?
Supervisor Long?
Present.
Supervisor Cook?
Present.
Supervisor Ard?
Present.
Supervisor Peterson?
Here.
Supervisor Peavy?
Here.
And if we could identify who call-in user one is, please?
Okay. Approval of the minutes from last month, November 17th and Tuesday. Any changes, edits, comments, additions, deletions? Hearing none, the minutes will stand as approved. So let's move on to public comment. Judy, I heard from you first, so you have the floor.
I just have a couple things to say about the agenda item about handling COVID absenteeism. And my main concern is that it's set up so that there would only be one instance. I mean, if you have a family of a mom and dad with 4 kids, or even just one parent, let's say a kid gets COVID, the mom has to stay home, mom or dad, and then they have to stay home even longer because they may have gotten it on the last day. And a month later, the school closes for 2 weeks. A month later, the mom gets COVID. And it's set up so that there's not a lot. I know the FMLA has 12 weeks. That's at 2/3 wages. And if they have to use some of their PTO and their LTSB, it gets used up pretty quickly. And just, this is an emergency, and just wanting to make sure you stay aware of the fact that it's not just a one-time shot. This COVID affects everybody in the family and in the community, and a household can have repercussions multiple times and use up a lot of sick days or medical leave. And my other concern is on page 90. Bob will explain this more because I had a big long talk with him today, but when they're talking about paying, I know they're paying for different things, but if they're paying 100%, it's $511 per day. And if it's for another, it's 2/3 pay, but it's only $200 a day. 200 is not 2/3 of $511. So I don't understand, and just so you can touch on it now rather than me asking all these questions during the full meeting. But those are the 2 things I wanted to mention. The first one is, to me, far more important because it's going to be becoming very easy for a lot of people to use up anything that's available to them, depending on who gets sick in their family, when they get sick, and what gets closed, daycare or schools. Thanks.
Thank you, Judy. Supervisor Hanson, you're also with us this afternoon. I know you want to make some comments, so the floor is yours.
Thanks very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Just very briefly, I had a talk today with a gentleman who owns a hotel down in River Falls, and he asked me, and we talked before, about the possibility of some kind of a relief for small businesses, especially hospitality businesses. And I was going to ask that the administration committee possibly take that up. I talked to Bob about that, what form it might take, and I didn't want to tell you your business. I don't have a clear idea of what that might look like. I don't know what the county can afford to do. So I wanted to propose that to you as an idea and let you take it from there. And that's all I had to say. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dan. Other public comment? Anyone else want to make public comment? Okay. Move on to our business items. I know we have quite a bit to cover tonight. I did want to reinforce that number 11, as Ken had pointed out, is at this point, at least for information for us to digest, so to speak, over the next month and discuss next month. And since we have a lot of agenda items, depending upon how quickly or slowly we move tonight, we can, if we choose to, if we could run out of steam by the time we get to number 10 to talk about the annual budget process, we can put that off till next month, depending upon how energetic or lack thereof we are at that point. So let's move on to the first business item, the financial report. Ken?
Thank you, Chair Long. So in the financial report, these are the numbers through November. This number comes up every time, this negative 2.2 million. It was unexpected because that has to do, this one I think is the refinancing of the debt that we did. That's the revenue side that came in, and then we have an expenditure side on the debt service that goes back out. So those are some of the things that you see. You can see the 2.849 million there on the debt service side. That's the negative side going back out. So those are some of the numbers in the overview. When we look through all of the departmental budgets, most of them are looking really good. You're going to notice a few of them that are in the red. Of any significance, we would look at 1410, the administration budget. That one has quite a bit of red on it. Some of those expenses were at negative 47,000. Some of those expenses were related to CARES funding dollars that we haven't received the revenue side yet. It hasn't been booked yet. So once that revenue is booked, that bottom line will look better. It still may end up slightly in the red on that one. Most of the other ones are looking pretty good. The other one that probably is going to be a little bit red is the facilities one. We'll get to that in just a second here. Before I get to the facilities one, I'm going to stop on the RHS one. So this one is negative by over $300,000. So RHS is the retirement health savings. So we budget $200,000 a year. We did up it for next year to $250,000. But this is where we take the long-term sick bank and pay it out to the employee at retirement into a medical-only use plan. So we have exceeded over $500,000 this year. We have cleared probably 3 or 4 of the top 5 off of the list. We do still have one long-term liability that's likely to retire next year, which is a big one. He's the number 1 on the list. So he'll come off there. I will bring forward a plan next month of how we're going to address this, because this puts this fund into a negative fund balance. And so it was actually Leah's idea. I'll give her credit for it. Hopefully you like the idea then. But we'll bring that forward next month as a way to resolve that negative deficit in here. But that's a big one, so I did want to stop and point it out. Property risk, we're doing okay. Work comp, we're a little bit negative right now, but not too far off. That one, fluctuates up and down. 2 years ago, we were negative 485. Last year, we were positive 215. So that's just, you're going to get up and down on that. Fleet vehicle, we'll get back even on. Facilities, 1610. So you're going to see a large red number on this one also. We're negative 300-some thousand on this. And again, a lot of it is CARES. We may or may not get all of it back, but this is where you're seeing a lot of the extra expenses we have because of the pandemic for the extra cleaning and the extra things that we've ended up purchasing have come through the facilities budget. So you're seeing some red there. When we get to the taxes, when we look at that, we did come back down to earth. For our September collections for taxes, there was $716,000 for sales tax in September. We finally fell off of that $900,000 that we were getting really used to, and that's much more of a normal September number for us. We are still running $800,000 ahead on the year, though, so we're going to finish well ahead of budget for sales tax for the year, unless nobody gets Christmas presents at all. On the KIP plan then, you'll see projects, and we're closing up a lot of these projects. And I know there was a question on the negative 66,000 on the highway facilities shop. That's been journal entered out now. That's been corrected. It's just a matter of timing and when things get booked and where they get booked and eventually fixed. But that'll come back down to a zero on next month's report. And that's all I have on the financial report. If there's any specific questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
I do have a real quick question on the on the KIP, the Homestead Park entrance station. Similarly, 68,000.
Yeah, a little different on that. So we have the 2021 budget for that, I believe, is 485,000. They've actually spent ahead a little bit. It's just the timing wise of where their contracts fall and stuff. So it ended up being encumbered into next year's budget number, really. So we did hold that until the budget was approved, and then like the next day we signed the contract so they could start that next phase.
Any other questions? Well, shaking heads, so we'll move on to the second item, Budget Amendment 2021-1.
Yeah, so we're doing this as a budget amendment. It's, as Corporation Counsel pointed out to me, it's not technically a budget amendment because we're not changing any line items of the budget. There's no expenses changing. But this is a supporting document within the budget, and so I thought this would be the most open way of providing the change for you. So by actually changing the sheet in the budget and explaining why we're changing it, and in the future, this is the place where we'll always be able to find it. And really, it's just that sheet, that page 22, I think it is in the budget book, is a new page for the budget. It lists out all special pays that we have. In the past, those were approved at different times, but we kind of would lose track of them. So we created a spreadsheet, made it a part of the budget, and all of those extra pay categories will be on here. So everyone that gets paid is either on that special pay table or they're in the McGrath wage grid. Those are really the only two places that compensation is displayed at, but that makes it easier then for us to identify, and when a change is needed, where to change it at. So this one specifically then, it was just missed previously. We haven't really addressed it since 2013. That was the last time there was a change. So it's the Reserve Auxiliary Deputies. They've been at $18.10 since 2013. Historically, what the sheriff told me was they were at 75% of the starting wage rate of a primary service deputy. So if we changed it to that rate, it brings it up to $21.53. There is about an $11,000 cost difference. If I look at all of the budgeted hours compared to $18 and $21, there's a fairly significant dollar increase. But the Sheriff's Department doesn't typically use all of those hours. So if we look back at the last 2 years, historically, all those hours weren't used. So they're going to fall still well within their budget, even with the increase in the hourly compensation. And so that's really what we're contemplating here, is the increase in the compensation for reserve deputies. And we'll do it as a budget amendment just so it's clear and open, and we make that change in a place where we can see it in future years.
Questions? Well, we have a resolution, so we need a motion, please.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I would move to approve the resolution as presented.
I'll second.
And motion by Supervisor Ard, second by Supervisor Peterson. Any further discussion? Any questions at all? Okay, hearing none, I believe this will require a roll call vote since it's a budget amendment.
All right, Supervisor Cook,
Yes.
Supervisor Ard,
Yes.
Supervisor Peterson,
Yes.
Supervisor Peavy,
Yes.
Supervisor Long.
Yes,
Motion carries.
thank you. Okay, we'll move on to business item number 3, tax deed bid consideration. And I guess I'll turn this back over to you, Ken.
Yeah, we're going to either pick up Corporation Counsel or Cindy Campbell, the county clerk, on this one.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can. Go ahead, Cindy.
Okay. So this is property in Glenwood City. It's a house. We received 3 bids on this property. They were due yesterday. The house was appraised at $49,500. The assessed value is $59,100. There's the house, the pictures of it. The first round of publications for this property, there were no bids received. So the second publication was done, and that means the committee can consider bids for less than the appraised value. And like I said, 3 bids were received. They are listed there on page 64 of the packet. Kevin Ullum submitted a bid for $6,000. JMK Acquisitions and Development submitted a bid for $1,111. And Richard Lewis Casillas submitted a bid for $100. The latest cost sheet is also in the packet. Costs so far on this property, $12,311.26, which doesn't include the latest publication, which I estimated at about $200. And I guess that's, I don't know if you have any questions about the property. The house needs repairs, sits on a small lot. There's no garage.
I do have one question for you, Cindy. After looking at the pictures, I guess, is the house repairable? Is it even worth repairing? That may be a different.
I don't know. I can't determine that.
Any comments? Supervisor
I guess
Peterson?
considering the amount of the bids, I'd be apt to sit and take a look at it for a while, re-advertise it again. That'd be my thought.
Other comments?
Mr. Chairman, looking at the property and in the notes that are within the packet, that there are 2 adjacent properties which are also vacant. Do we know if those properties are also on the tax deed roll?
I talked to the city clerk today, and she said she just told me they were vacant. One has been vacant for a while. This house that we're talking about today has been vacant for at least a couple years. And one of the other houses, the person who lived there recently passed away, and so the house is sitting vacant.
Okay. I think this is something that we should take a longer view look at, given that you have 3 properties which are currently vacant, one being a tax deed. The possibility of someone coming in and bidding higher because the other 2 properties may become available. Because it's a perfect setup for multi-unit housing development. I think we should take a little time to look at this from a longer view and assess more information on the adjoining properties to see what this parcel may bring in the future.
I would tend to agree with that, Supervisor Hart, that I think the bids are rather low. And I think we should, the next step would be to re-advertise, take another shot at it, I guess another way to put it.
One of the options I've used in the past for property that doesn't sell is to place it on the Wisconsin Surplus Online Auction Service. It reaches more people, and I'll continue to have it on the website.
Okay.
Do we need a motion then to reject that then? Okay, I'd so move we reject the bid.
I'll second that. Any further discussion, comments? So the motion on the on the table is to reject the bids. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? That motion carries, so we'll take another shot at it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. Okay, let's move on to number 4, consideration of an agreement with the city of Glenwood City regarding the parcels of delinquent real estate tax. I'm sorry?
I will take this.
Okay, Scott will take this.
Yeah, so the city of Glenwood City in either late 2018 or early 2019 purchased what was formerly the elementary school or school of the school district that had been owned by a private entity. And at that time, it owed 4 years of back taxes. Now, once the city acquires it, going forward, it's tax exempt and no taxes were levied. The property was contaminated with a substantial amount of asbestos. And originally, this committee had authorized that if they met the terms and conditions of the statute that we would that the county would forgive the real estate taxes. But unfortunately, one of the requirements, that being an agreement with the DNR, simply wasn't possible with this, as my understanding, wasn't possible with this type of contamination. So therefore, it was not eligible for the cancellation of real estate taxes. The city has spent a tremendous amount of money on this property, almost $135,000. And so the other way to quote unquote skin the cat would be for the county to acquire this property. And currently it is subject to a court proceeding for foreclosure. The county acquire the property and then deed the property back to the city of Glenwood City, which would in essence affect the agreement that was reached about 1.5 years ago. So I'd be looking for a motion to approve an agreement to acquire the property, then deed it back to the city of Glenwood City.
Scott, I have a question for you, if I may.
Sure.
The requirement that wasn't met, can you give us a little more detail on that requirement?
So that requirement required that the city obtain an agreement in advance for proper disposal of the hazardous waste. And then in talking with the city's engineers, that simply wasn't possible because this was not an active discharge.
So if we didn't meet the requirements of the statute, would there be any potential liability for the county in the future?
Oh, I don't believe so, because the property has been remediated, and under this agreement, the city would take the property back almost immediately, and the county's not required to remediate, even if there was some kind of discharge, unless it was imminent threat. Which I don't believe is the case here. So the short answer is no, I don't believe so.
Do we have any idea on what the potential future use of the property would be, given it was an old school?
I think they're looking to develop this property, but I don't have anything more specific than that.
Other questions? Supervisor Peavy.
I would move to follow Scott's supervisor or Corp Counsel Cox's recommendation. I would move that forward.
Second.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the resolution signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Okay, we'll move on to number 5, a resolution amending personnel policies for personal leave, FMLA, and employee benefits.
Hey, this is Audrey Haycraft. I can speak to those. Just kind of a high overview of some of the changes. We only made changes to basically match what we're doing with our plan language for benefits and for leave of absences, and just made some, small updates to make the policy maybe a little bit more vague so that we wouldn't have to change it so many times in the future by putting very specific detailed information within it. So with the family and medical leave policy, that's updating the same policy, which was known as Article 17. It's now going to be 2.11. And really the main thing there, we added a reference to our third-party administrator, changing the way that you should apply for leave. So before it said that you should apply internally. When that is incorrect, we are now using a third-party administrator for applications. We also, this is where we remove specific types of paid time leave and just created a broader statement that employees must use any accrued time, but also added language that there is an exemption to that rule based on the legalities of the Wisconsin FMLA, and also if they're employees that are receiving short-term disability or other paid leave, such as workers' comp, that we cannot require them to use accrued paid time in those situations. So we spelled that out in the document as well. And then just added some additional language, which used to be in the benefit policy about what happens regarding your benefits. We moved that right into the FMLA policy to let them know what would happen, and just updated the language on how they would pay their premiums. And then for the personal leave of absence, kind of the same type of basic changes there. We did update the eligibility language from 20 hours. It was pointed out that there was part-time 1, part-time 2. So we just kind of got rid of that language and updated it to regular full-time and regular part-time employees, and that temporary on-call employees are not eligible. Also added language regarding the use of paid time off benefits needing to be taken before unpaid time can be taken. And then also, once again, what happens with benefit continuation if you are on an unpaid, or if your leave becomes unpaid, that you're not on a benefit protected leave, and so that you would be offered COBRA or portability at the end of the month after your last day in active pay status. And then the benefit policy, that is really, we updated the entire chapter. So Article 10 used to house or currently does house all of the paid leaves, so including personal leave, military leave, jury duty, FMLA. So we have the way that we are writing the new policies, we're changing where some of that information is to be found at. So Chapter 3 is going to focus just on benefits, and then paid time off, holiday pay, leave of absences. We removed all the language from the benefit policy, and we're going to add that into a separate chapter of its own called time at work and time away from work. So when I say that we removed language, we're just putting it into a new location. Also removed Social Security, unemployment compensation, United Way sections as well. Once again, we just updated the eligibility language to match our plan documents that employees must be working 30 or more hours per week to be eligible for all benefits, with the exception of health and wellness reimbursement, supplemental benefits such as AFLAC and deferred comp, and WRS, which has its own rules. And then added additional sections regarding contributions, additional sections regarding enrollment, so anywhere from your open enrollment to special enrollment and your initial enrollment and how that works. And then once again, removed kind of any language regarding to how benefits are impacted if you are out on a leave, because we added that language into the leave policies instead. Life insurance, just got rid of some specific language about how the plan design looks at the 1, 2, and 3 times, and just replace that with the more vague language to say that that way that we can change that plan design in the future if we want to without having to come back and rewrite a policy. Added information on flexible spending accounts, and then also added additional information on the employee assistance program. Any question on any of those?
If I could point out maybe just the two most important ones, I guess, that I see for you. One is the 30-hour eligibility. Our plan documents were kind of in different places on different things, so we kind of unified everything. So there were some changes where we made everything the same at that 30 hours. So that's the cutoff delineation that we use. And then the other part, probably that I would point out, is that 10th, 11th language, and you see that rule. We've replaced that rule with how it worked before was if you worked on the 11th of the month when you're separating, you were covered for the rest of the month and the next month. So what we've changed is you're covered the month that you leave. So if you work on the 1st, you're covered to the end of the month. So that gives you 30 days of coverage from your last day work. That's the most that you can get. If you want to maximize benefits, you work on the 1st. Before it was the 11th, and then you got 50 some days because you'd get the rest of the month and then the next month. So where we shifted that to was the beginning of the employment. So our old policy had been you'll start the 1st of the month following 30 days of employment. So if you started on the 15th, you would go 45 days really before you started. Now we start on the 1st of the month after you start. So if you start on the 15th, you'll start in 2 weeks on the 1st. So we want to cover employees when they're working for us, not the employees that have left us. And so that's where the shift came. And then to coincide with that, we've changed payroll deductions to coincide with the month of coverage rather than the month before coverage. But of all this stuff, those are probably the biggest changes that the employees are going to see. The rest of it is really cleaning it up and making things more clear.
Questions? So it does sound like most of it, the impetus was mostly cleanup, clarification, as opposed to the couple items that you mentioned for true changes.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. Okay, so I guess we need a motion.
I'll move we approve the resolution amending personal policies as presented.
I'll second that.
Second, Supervisor Peavy. Any further discussion? Okay, I guess we're set to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? The motion carries. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to number 6. Consideration of personnel leave policies related to COVID-19.
Yeah, and this is more of a discussion point. And Supervisor Achterhoff had brought up a couple of things that we can address at this point. One was the one type of leave that's available. And maybe we'll come back to that one second because the other one's a lot easier to answer. So her second question was about on that one page where it shows the $500 coverage and then the $200 coverage. That's the federal policies. We were just quoting what the federal policies are and the limits that are within the federal guidelines. So that's not anything within our jurisdiction. Audrey could maybe explain it for you, but what I can tell you is that's not something that we would be able to change anyways. So that's probably the easier answer on that one. As far as coverage for a one-time event, there are multiple different types of coverage, and there's multiple different usages for them. So there are that 12 weeks that are at the 2/3 pay. What our employees typically do is they'll supplement PTO so they're still getting full pay with that, but if they were out of PTO, it would be at that 2/3 pay rate. So it's a federal guideline in order to keep people getting paid through the pandemic. If you look at all of the documentation that our HR department had put together about all of the different leaves that we have available, we do have a lot of different leave types and very good benefits for our employees. I think the biggest question really that we have right now, and we've been talking about it at a staff level also, is what are we going to do as of the end of the year? Because right now we've been using our leave plans that we have and the federal leave plans. The federal leave plans expire at the end of the year unless they're extended. And I haven't heard yet that they're going to be extended. There's talk about it, but it hasn't happened yet. So what do we do at that point? Because I think that's the big question mark that we have right now. So a couple of the things that we're looking at is we could extend the federal programs with the exact same guidelines. Tara's been sending me some links to some other counties, what they've been doing. What they've been doing, and it's one of the options that we talked about, was creating a separate 80-hour leave bank for people to use if it's a COVID-related leave. So again, there's no funding source for that. That's just coming out of your departmental budget. If you have somebody that goes on a COVID leave in January or February, the federal leaves weren't extended, they don't have any PTO available, there's this new 80-hour thing that we would create for them. So any of the options that we talk about, and then I'll stop and take a breath so you guys can ask questions, is I can do those under the emergency authority of the county administrator. I'm really looking for feedback at this point of where you think our gaps might be and what your recommendations might be for me. But that's the discussion that we have, and that's what we're looking for.
Comments?
I guess I'm thinking in the back of my mind, and maybe I'm an eternal optimist, but with the shots finally coming out, and it looks like we may have 2 more companies online, hopefully within the month. My personal opinion is just thinking kind of status quo for now. Let's wait and see and have a look-see. And if something is needed in the foreseeable future, then we act on it. But just my thought, wait and see.
The comments?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I would have Mr. Administrator, have we had any issues with a rolling COVID quarantine for any of our employees? Such as one family member is quarantined and then the next thing, the children are quarantined and the family is on a rolling quarantine. Has that happened with any employees?
Yeah, I'd ask one of the HR people to address that. They have much more in-depth knowledge of individual cases than I do.
Yeah, we have had a couple people that have been quarantined for like a full 21 days or 28 days because of the household situation. To date, I'm aware of 5 employees that have used up all of their EPSLA or that 80 hours that is supplied to them, where they've been off multiple times, or just that more than the 14 rolling calendar days. So out of 170 people who have used the leave, 5 of those had to go into a situation where they had to use their PTO bank or LTSB hours. In addition to that, we had 3 employees that had to take unpaid time because they used up their COVID pay and they didn't have any PTO available. So the numbers are pretty low. It all depends on how much longer this lasts before vaccines come out. And we have around 70 employees that have less than 40 hours of PTO available, where they could run into that situation, that if they need more than the 80 hours that the EPSLA provides, that they could run into a situation where they'd be using their own PTO and perhaps run out of paid time.
And remember, our total employee population, about 700, so.
So we're dealing with actually a very low percentage, which with COVID, it's difficult to say. Everyone could be affected. My own work is currently affected. So, but I would agree that this is something I think we should take a long look at and give consideration should this event should the COVID worsen. But I think at this point, we have a very good policy in place and a very low percentage of employees who are currently being affected.
I have a question. The employees that are affected, are they generally salaried, or are they more part-time, maybe lower on the grid from an income standpoint? I'm just wondering where they might fall in terms of their ability to handle unpaid leave. Hope that made sense.
I guess I haven't looked at, their pay rates specifically. It definitely is impacting people who are in those type of positions that they cannot work from home. So people who can work from home don't necessarily need this leave because unless they're quite sick, they might need to use a couple hours here or there and can take some intermittent leave. But those that can't, so the healthcare campus, highway department, and sheriff's office are the main people who have been applying for and utilizing the EPSLA.
Then perhaps those are the departments that we need to look at in coming up with an alternative process should they need additional time. Perhaps that should be the consideration.
Supervisor Peavy.
Yeah, I'd like to echo Supervisor Peterson's comments that I think we should wait and see how this rolls out, and let Administrator Witt, whatever term you use in front of his name today, Interim Administrator Witt has commented he has the authority under the emergency authorization. If something comes up quickly, short term, that doesn't have to come back to this committee, he can act. So I think we're well prepared for what may or might happen. So I think we're good that way.
Supervisor Cook?
I think I would kind of follow along Supervisor Ard's comments. If we have a group of employees that don't have the flexibility to work from home, it is a different impact for them than the folks that maybe have an opportunity to do that. So I guess my question is how easily would we be able to take a look at that, looking at certain, I don't know if it's certain job types or certain departments. And then my other question would be, assuming you have the ability to, Interim Administrator Witt has the ability to take action based on the emergency order, how quickly could we do that? And would it be beneficial for you to have any criteria from this group or from the board to make those decisions? I'm not sure if that is something that you would be looking for.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was looking for tonight, is some guidance, get a feeling for what you would have an appetite for. Because I don't want to make a decision and say, okay, well, I'm going to grant these additional leaves, and then I report it to the next county board, and you guys go, no, that was not at all what we were thinking. You were way off there. So I want to get, some input so that whatever I do create, you guys go, yeah, that's exactly what we were thinking. Good job. Too much detail.
Well, I would say that we probably all agree that, we're concerned, obviously, and that we need to really closely monitor. I would mostly be concerned about those who don't have the financial wherewithal to handle unpaid leave, maybe in the lower step brackets. And so we can really keep an eye on that and then act accordingly. And then keep us up to date. We can even touch base on it next month as well, and you can give us an update. Hopefully, I agree with Supervisor Peterson that we'll start seeing this resolve itself, maybe slowly, but eventually. But we do want to definitely keep tabs on what employees are experiencing and make sure that we're responding appropriately. I don't know if that's very specific, but any other comments?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
In reviewing what has been stated in the departments affected, transportation, the sheriff's department, and interim administrator Witt, was it the health center that you were speaking of as well?
Yes.
These are essentially our frontline workers. Our sheriff's department, our health center workers, and certainly transportation. We don't want to be down on transportation when we're in the midst of winter, and sooner or later, Mother Nature is going to dump on us. I think we all know that. But I think in directing the interim administrator to take action as needed as cases present is a much more directed action within long-term consideration as to how we can resolve future issues. But should an event present itself for an employee, I think the interim administrator should be able to respond immediately.
Yep, and I can.
And you have the ability to do that.
Yes, I do.
Okay. So, do you,
Did Carr have another question?
I'm sorry, go ahead, Supervisor.
It's not necessarily a question. I just think that, a lot of entities, organizations have been able to look at more flexibility for employees and, again, allowing them to work from home. But if we have critical staff that are not able to do that, I think it's in the county's interest and the public's interest to support them in some way. So I would like also to see, consideration to those groups and make sure that this is something that's beyond their control, and this is something that isn't going to, throw them into a situation where they can't pay mortgages and things like that because we're not willing to be flexible with our policy.
Supervisor Peterson?
I think probably Administrator Witt knows that, we are giving him the marching orders, so to speak, here. And if it does get to a point where he thinks that it's out of his purvey to do what he wants to do, he would not hesitate to call us back to maybe even a special meeting if he needed authorization. Am I right on that, Ken?
Yeah, if needed. I think, though, that I have an understanding of what you guys are looking for. And I turned to HR Director Davies Fox, though, because she's my partner on making these decisions. Do you think you have enough understanding of what they're looking for? Did you have any follow-up questions for them on what type of parameters they would be comfortable with?
No, I don't. I think I understand their thoughts on this.
Okay.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you. I know we weren't real specific, but I hope you get an understanding of where you need to go, and I think you know. Anyway. Any other further comments or suggestions on that particular item? Okay, we'll move on to, where's my agenda?
Segues right into the next item.
The next, number 7, resolution appointing Kenwood County Administrator, improving employment agreement. I'm sure Ken was anxious to get to this one.
Well, thank you to the search committee and the whole county board for the confidence you guys have placed in me. I will go over the terms of the contract here that are before you, so you understand what you're getting yourselves into. It's in the same format as the prior county administrator's contract, so if you've ever looked at that one, it's very similar. It has a 5-year term. There are different provisions for terminating the contract early. Before that, at the end of the 5 years, it automatically renews for 1-year terms. If you look at the salary component, it's at the grade 90, which is the grade for the position, and it starts at a step 6 with an increase after 6 months. That's built into that. So we look at, on our grid, step 6 to 8 is typically where we look at a market rate. So that's within that range of where a market rate would be. Also, if you look at it in relation to what we have budgeted, it's below the amount that's budgeted for the year. It's below the amount that the prior administrator, Patrick Thompson, would have been making for 2021. And the other thing that you don't see here, because we eliminated it, was the $4,800 a year auto allowance. So that's also an additional cost savings for you. It does have, let's see, the eligibility for a future bonus. It's fairly open-ended to be defined by the administration committee and an amount as determined by the county board in the future. Let's see. PTO accrual will be at 320 or at 20 years of service on the accrual. It does have a buyout provision of my current PTO, which is well in excess of that cap right there, to buy that down. Buying it down at the old rate actually does save the county money in the long run. As you can see from that RHS fund that we have, that's where all that money ends up in the end. Professional dues, loyalties, severance. So severance for cause has no payout. Without cause severance has a 6-month severance package, and then I have a 28-day notification requirement. And all the other provisions of the contract are fairly standard contract language. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have on it, though.
Supervisor Peterson.
I'd just like to cover one point, and correct me if I'm wrong. It was back there on the bonus. I thought I recalled our conversation was that we would rephrase that as instead of shall, would be available. I don't recall the exact word. I know it wasn't shall, though. Thinking that we would be eligible to come up with a program or a goal that would qualify them for, but by saying shall in there would be, in my estimation, an indicator that that was maybe a yearly thing, and I don't think that was our intent, but I may be wrong. I'll put that out just for what it is.
Yeah, I think that I'm not sure, well, we talked about annual, but periodic, coming up with, the administration committee coming up with items that might be above and beyond the normal tasks and expectations of the county administrator. For example, one of the things that we talked about was the importance of creating customer service culture within the county for the county employees. Tough to measure, but for example, we did the survey. There may be some things in there that we can actually measure areas that maybe we're not doing so well at, and maybe we can address, or the county administrator can address, and in another year or two we can do another survey to see, or periodic feedback to see how well we're addressing that particular area. So things that would be kind of above and beyond the normal expectations of the county administrator that give us the ability to set some measurable criteria and reward the county administrator appropriately, if that made any sense. Does that?
Mr. Chairman,
Supervisor Art.
if the word shall is removed and replaced with the word may, employee may be eligible for a bonus based upon measurable criteria, then I believe that will clarify what the administrator may be eligible for.
Yes, thank you, Supervisor Ard. That's, I think, what you were getting at, Supervisor.
Yeah, I'd be
Peterson.
very comfortable with me.
And Mr. Chair, I actually authored this and ran it by Ken. I agree with Supervisor Ard's suggestion. And so that to make it completely discretionary, you may want to consider at the end of the sentence the words "at their sole discretion." So to make it that there isn't any kind of binding effect of this agreement on guaranteeing a bonus unless the county board agrees to it.
Comments? What do you think about that?
I would completely agree with Corp Counsel Cox's statement. That does clarify the statement so that there would be no challenges in the future regarding the intent of the statement.
I'm thinking we're all in agreement with that also.
I see nodding heads, so that means we're all in agreement with making those modifications.
Ken's okay too with it, yeah.
And Ken, are you nodding your head too? Or?
Yes, I am. Those changes are fine.
Just checking.
Yes. So you can make, if you want, the approval of the resolution contingent on those changes to the contract.
Okay.
Yep, that's fine.
So do we have a motion to approve the resolution
I'd move we approve the resolution as amended.
as amended?
Second.
Second, by Supervisor Ard. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries as amended. Okay. Let's move on to number 8, resolution authorizing the broadband assessment RFP.
Yeah, give me just a second to catch up on the vote. Okay, broadband assessments. So we're wrapping up our broadband connectors pilot program. This is the last week of our weekly meetings that we've been having with the WDC. It's been very helpful to make some connections and talk to some experts in the state and in the industry about what the options are that are available for us out there. We had looked at, because we had found Marathon County had done a broadband assessment. If you go out to their website, you can find their completed work. But that was kind of the model that we started with, and really working through the process, that's still the direction we think will be most beneficial for St. Croix County. Their broadband assessment costs $48,000, so I'd anticipate something in a similar price range. We're a little bit smaller, actually, geographically than Marathon County. I don't know if that matters or not, but I think an assessment is the way to go, because this will give us guidance on where we can get the most bang for our buck for projects, and then we can pursue those providers that are supposed to be servicing those areas to say, hey, if you would spend $1 million project right here, you would serve all of these additional people, and we will even help you. We're going to co-write the grant with you. We're going to do some things to make sure that you score higher in the grant process with the PSC so that your project is successful. So then with this assessment, we just start attacking the different pieces where we get the most benefit and the providers that are the most willing to work with us. So that's what the assessment is going to do. I put it as a resolution. Normally RFPs don't come through the county board, but since this one was unbudgeted and there's been a lot of interest in the broadband about what we're doing, I thought it provides a great opportunity to give you an update and at the county board also that this is going out, and to explain what this process will look like, when we expect to see the results, and what the next steps after that will be. So that's where we're at right now.
Comments, Supervisor Cook?
Mr. Chair, I would move for approval of the RFP assessment.
I'll second.
And then, Mr. Chair, I have one question.
Yes.
Where do you anticipate will we be advertising for these this RFP out and anywhere besides the county website, or what is the plan for that?
Yes, advertising. So we know the 5 companies that bid on the Marathon County one. So we will send the solicitation directly to those 5. There's been 1 or 2 additional firms that were identified through our connectors meeting that could potentially be interested. So I think we have a list of about 7 that we will send to directly. Other than that, it will just be a listing on the county's bid page.
Supervisor Peterson?
If you could clarify, Ken, I assume that this would also, this study, when it's done, whoever gets it, will also give us the current, data on whether we should be looking at maybe not satellite or cable or whatever. I mean, it's so confusing. There's so many options. Will they be covering that in the RFP?
Yeah, let me, I know where that section is. So when we look at, I think it's in this project task here, when we look at the different tasks that we're going to have, it does talk about, giving us guidance, and it even talks about 5G. So I think they're going to suggest that, what I anticipate is they're going to say, these areas are capable of being served by fixed wireless. You should be able to extend the fixed wireless to serve these areas. These areas over here, the only way you're going to serve them is by satellite. So you might as well just, not look for a fixed wireless solution for them. You're going to need to look for a satellite solution for them. And here's your options for that. Enhancing it would be potentially putting towers in, because there are some non-direct solutions out there also. So I think it's going to be a combination of different solutions, different for different sections of the county.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments? I will add that I'm anxious to move this forward as quickly as possible, so. Okay, seeing no other discussion or comments, I believe that since this is a budget item, we would need a roll call vote, if I'm not mistaken. See, I'm learning.
You don't actually need a roll call. This is just the resolution is going to the board, correct?
Correct.
Okay, I stand corrected. All those, okay, any other discussion? All right, seeing none, ready to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. And we're ready to move on. Okay, our next business item is consideration of creating financial incentive program for businesses following public health advisory recommendations. Supervisor Cook.
This was my suggestion. So this is where I'm at with this. As Ken included in the packet, as we know, there was an economic relief and recovery task force that discussed some options to potentially provide some relief for businesses. I know we didn't, as a board, we didn't move those forward. And at the same time, we have a situation where we have a St. Croix County Public Health Advisory, which asks all sectors of the community to do something to help prevent the spread of COVID. And a key part of that, those actions are related to businesses, whether we're asking them for, to reduce capacity, or if people are wearing masks, things like that, that will likely affect maybe the overall capacity of the business itself, or the funds that it's pulling in. I know that some businesses have spent a lot of money to implement some barriers or measures in place to help meet that public health advisory recommendation. Others that I've talked to have told me, well, that sounds great, but I can't afford to do that. So what I'm looking at with this proposal, and it's really, I guess I'm putting it out there for a conversation right now because I don't have a specific idea of what we'd do, but how can we create a situation where we can allow businesses and support businesses so they can support some of the public health advisory recommendations that we have for a community? I feel like there's a trade-off here, a give and take that may benefit everyone as a whole. And so I'd like to have the conversation and find a way that we can provide opportunities for our business community to be partners with us in as we look at the public health advisory recommendations that we have.
So my question would be, are you looking at helping out those businesses that can't afford to follow the guidelines as much as they'd like to, or businesses that were successful in following those guidelines and kind of a little reward, so to speak?
It's a good question, Mr. Chair. I see this as, and I don't have the exact details on that, I see it as, are there opportunities that we can look to incentivize businesses potentially that haven't don't feel like they have the ability to help support us with those recommendations, and potentially, I guess that would also potentially reward businesses that have done so. I don't know how the criteria would work at this point, but if, say, we identified metrics where we'd say, okay, if they're doing X to meet this part of the health recommendations, then you could look at businesses that maybe have already done that, or ones that are just not quite there yet, who maybe want to do that, but don't feel like there's that incentive there. So I know that in the packet we have some suggestions that are some of the ways that the county interacts with businesses, whether it's taxes or inspection fees, I think, things like that. And so are there opportunities for us to look at some of those aspects in the way that the county interacts with those businesses and come up with a way to partner with them to achieve public outcomes? So I'm bringing it here to see if there's, I guess the one thing I'm bringing here is to see, this is, we had the vote on the ordinance. This is not a discussion about the public health ordinance that was voted down. But I know part of that conversation was, there was many comments about partnership and ways that we can work together as a community to achieve the outcomes. And so I was thinking that instead of this is more of a carrot as a way to potentially support the opportunity for businesses to partner with us. We know that and we've heard from Supervisor Hansen and public comment that they're, asking for some help. I know it's not, you could argue this comes with strings attached, but I think there's maybe a mutual benefit here that we could potentially look into. So.
It's really complex. And I guess my take is that maybe not trying to do something with this group right now. I'm thinking that we could ask, I don't know, Ken, you can object to it, but I'm thinking maybe have Ken, whether it be with some of his department heads or whatever, do some brainstorming, maybe check with some other counties, see what they're doing, and get some ideas perhaps, and then come back either to the admin committee or to Cara or whoever and give us some suggestions. That's just my thought. Everything is in such flux right now that who knows what's next month's going to bring. So that's just my thought again.
Another thought that kind of rambled through my brain is possibly maybe, and I know there's still a lot of businesses that are struggling, maybe revisit some sort of a small business grant program. We kind of had that all laid out and we tabled it. So that might be another option to resurrect and consider. That might help some of those businesses who, to help them or encourage them to follow the guidelines. I know one other thing that we had talked about from a communication standpoint is highlighting businesses that had been successful in following the guidelines and how they were successful, and so that shows that, hey, the guidelines are good and you need to follow them, and you can be successful following these guidelines, and really highlight that business so that, the public will feel even that much more comfortable patronizing that business because they know they're being careful. So I know that's one thing that we talked about from a communication standpoint. Not quite sure where that stands. And we might take a second look at some of the other items that were thrown out from this Economic Relief and Recovery Task Force, or even resurrect that to have another discussion about some other possible things that we might be able to do. But I really agree with your comment about, okay, we put the ordinance aside, so let's make sure that we're still trying to work on some things to promote these guidelines. And so that people will hopefully follow them voluntarily, and we can still have success at, our trending our line of cases trending downward. Other thoughts?
I guess I'd agree with the carrot aspect. I'd certainly want to make sure that whatever we did not include those who chose to disregard all the guidelines.
I did have one follow-up question, I guess, for Supervisor Cook, is for the businesses that follow the guidelines, are you looking for that financial incentive to be a replacement for their lost income, or just a token amount to acknowledge the good work they've done? It makes a huge difference.
I would not be looking at to replace lost income. I would say it's more of it because that, I mean, first of all, that could, for some businesses, that could be quite high. But basically an acknowledgement that the county understands that asking them to do some of this stuff, could impact their bottom line, but that, we want to be a partner with them as well and hope that they want to work with us to still achieve larger outcomes.
Yeah, the only thing I'd want to be careful of is if we reward a business who was willing to spend or had the financial wherewithal to put some of those things in place, and we're rewarding them, whereas another business that just didn't have the finances, and then, that they might feel a little slighted. I don't know.
Yep, I agree, Mr. Chair. There's a lot of details to work out. I bring it to this group to, see if there's an, interest to continue the conversation. I know that there's a lot to work through. I don't know if perhaps if it makes sense for a combination of staff, like Supervisor Peterson suggested, to look at some items, or also that perhaps the task force could possibly meet again and have some of those conversations. But I would like to see, before we did not move some of those ideas forward, I would like us to see us consider some of that trade-off and some of that mutual goals be a part of those conversations versus straight grants to businesses myself.
Supervisor Cook, how would you fund this program?
Supervisor Ard, I do not know yet. That would be part of the discussion, I guess. I know this is something we haven't dealt with before, so I think, again, I don't have an answer right now, but I think there are potential, I guess part of it would depend on, what kind of incentives we are looking at. As we know, we have a record sales tax year. I don't know if that's a potential revenue source, but again, this is just an idea, and I'm just looking to see if there's any interest in considering it further.
Peterson?
As complex as it is, and I think we're sensing that as we're talking, there's ability and then the reward. And as Kara said, somebody or Ken, who had the wherewithal to do a lot of things, I think that would have to weigh in too. So all that said, my personal opinion, once again, this is not anybody else's, is that a task force would be kind of unmanageable, I'm thinking, with the detail that we have to get into, and I guess that's why I'm thinking it'd be better to have the administrator do some research, so to speak, on it, and then come back to us with suggestions. But my thoughts.
Yeah, I support the idea of, like we always say, the devil's in the details. So I would follow up on Supervisor Peterson's comment and task the administrator with coming up with some kind of a broad proposal, and then this committee or we establish the task force could come up with some details. However, with this has to be moved forward fairly quickly. Hopefully with the vaccine, I don't want this to get all done, but the vaccine is here and we don't have to do them. So I think time is of the essence in this project.
All right.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Supervisor Ard.
My thought would be, rather than tasking the administrator, who already has more than a full platter, that the EDC be asked to participate in gathering documentation or data, which will give us a much better idea as to the businesses affected in St. Croix County, since they have a direct connection with businesses in St. Croix County. And since they have a direct connection with the chambers within St. Croix County, I believe they would be able to provide us much more specific information and data than the administrator would have time to collect.
Yeah, your thoughts, Mr. Administrator?
To Supervisor Ard's point, I don't always do all those things just myself. I do utilize a lot of resources and staff to get to that data, and they would be an excellent source, so I appreciate that suggestion. I do have a little bit of wheels turning now. The rust came off. I think I have an idea maybe that we can bring forward, just maybe a couple follow-up questions, so I can put something together. Is what types of businesses did you want to limit the types of businesses that were providing this reward to? Really, I guess that's the way I'm looking at it. It's a reward for having followed the protocols. So we're going to limit it down to those that were most affected. So there's manufacturing plants that have followed guidelines. Do they need to be recognized and rewarded, or are we looking just at service industries?
I don't have an answer for you yet. I think some of the conversation likely could also, I suppose, look at almost sizes of business. I mean, that could be categories too, whether we're looking at small businesses that are directly impacted versus large businesses. I don't know if the rest of the committee has ideas about if there are specific types of businesses that you would consider potentially more important to address with this proposal. Again, the proposal is very vague right now, so I guess it's really hard to answer that question. I guess it probably also will depend on the type of where the revenue source might come from, what kind of incentive we would be offering, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, that probably drives where my revenue source comes from. If we're looking at $1,000 incentive for a small service industry business that had followed the guidelines, just as a way of saying, thank you for doing everything that you could have done during this process, whereas other businesses just disregarded it. I mean, that's a lot different number that I have to find as a revenue source to fund than something that covers every business and is $50,000 per business.
Right.
So there's a lot of variability in there, which drives the ease of where I can find the revenue to cover it. Mm-hmm. So if we can hammer out what the scope of the program would be, that will go a long way towards putting the details together and me being able to present something at the next meeting that you would actually be able to take action on.
I would add that I think we'd probably be better off really trying to focus on smaller businesses who more than likely don't have as much of a financial wherewithal than maybe a larger manufacturing company. So I think the smaller businesses are the ones that we really need to try to find a way to support to keep them in business so that they can survive into next year.
Mm-hmm.
And you define a small business by sales volume, by employees? Sorry to ask all these questions, but these are the details that you have to have in order to put the program together.
Yeah.
And I can just randomly pick stuff, but if you have an opinion, by all means, share.
Well, I think, couldn't we use some of the criteria that we had talked about last summer? When we talked about the grant program, we actually implemented the loan program, so we did have some defining criteria in terms of small business. And with regard to the loan program, I know that we had set aside $500,000, and not all of that was used. So part of that was, or what was left, was going to go roll back into the general fund. Well, that might still be available for a funding source. Supervisor?
Just off the top of my head again, I'm thinking that suggestion, a possibility of the $1,000, we appreciate that. that could go a long way if we're looking at, who knows, 20,000 left over from this or that. We could attaboy a lot of businesses.
So not to add anything to your plate, but
It's bottomless, don't worry.
we're, but I think that it sounds like we're all in agreement to keep the wheels turning and see what you might be able to come up with and suggest with, I'm sure, the help of a lot of your staff as well.
In ADC.
Yes. Yep. I will have something on your next agenda that's actionable.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Ken.
Okay, the next item is number 10, consideration of the annual budget process. So I will stop here. It's 6:20. You guys are ready to dive into this little brainstorming session?
Short break first and then dive into it?
What's that?
Short break and then dive into it?
We can take a quick 2-3 minute, 5-minute break, and then we'll discuss it and wrap it up. All right, good idea. Supervisor Peterson, your time's up. Okay, so we'll move on to consideration of the annual budget process. And this is something that I brought up some time ago. And basically just to go through kind of a brainstorming exercise as to what's worked well in the past. I mean, it really is important to point out things that have worked well and we're really happy with, as well as other things that we might consider that might improve the process. And one of the things that I think I was probably most, not concerned about, but interested in was trying to engage the board a little earlier in the process. Because it's kind of tough when you get the final recommended budget in the middle of October, and then you've got 3 weeks basically to digest it and vote on it in early November. So I just kind of laid out this, some of my thoughts. I'm hoping that you had a chance to read it. And then I think the outcome from this discussion is really to provide, now that we have a fairly good idea who our county administrator is going to be, provide just some suggestions and ideas for him to consider in terms of any possible changes or improvements in the process. So I'll start out by asking if anyone had any particular thoughts or ideas on maybe some of the things that I laid out, and if you thought they were really bad ideas, and that's okay. This is just more of a discussion on the process itself. Supervisor Cook.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I think I agree with your idea that having the board more involved at the beginning is probably beneficial to the board and ultimately our constituents, but also for our administrator and for county staff, because they don't want to take all the time to go through the process and get to a budget and then present it to the board and we're saying this is not what we're thinking from a policy standpoint at all. So I would highly agree with that suggestion. I don't know if there's a possibility I see you suggest some potential options as committee chairs, working more with the department heads or county administrator. I would offer potentially maybe a workshop earlier on where the board can just kind of connect some of the strategic objectives that we have. I see you mentioned strategic planning is key, and I would agree with that as well. But where we can maybe have more conversations about how our strategic plan directly impacts the budget process earlier in the year.
Excuse me, Supervisor Peterson.
I was kind of looking at I had some thoughts when you mentioned maybe a supervisor or committee chair, and in the context of maybe possibly sitting in on some of the actual, with the department head, and I guess I kind of felt that might be a little red flag to me. I'm not sure. I know that you and I are perfect as far as chairs, but there are some that may be not so perfect that, you know, that I think maybe might not be such a good idea, but that's the thought there. I'm thinking more along, I think, what Carr was saying, that whether it would be, you know, an extra committee of the whole or an earlier meeting of some sort. You know, I'm not sure exactly how. A lot of your suggestions are good. I agree with them. So it's just my thought. That's the only one kind of caveat that I had there. I'd be a little concerned about putting somebody in with the division head and the administrator, but that's my thought.
Supervisor Peavy.
Mine was more of a comment, you know.
Hit your mic.
Yep, mine was more of a comment. You know, the committees all should, so every county board member should be very familiar with at least 1/5 of the budget, because their committee should have reviewed that. So, you know, if the committee isn't familiar with their part of the budget, you know, they should be more involved in that. And, you know, I like the other comments are all great, and having an earlier, I wouldn't want to call it a committee of the whole, but a discussion session, or whatever you wanted it, where we could all throw out some ideas. You know, and the strategic plan, you know, it's very important to know what we have to do and what we like to do. You know, some of these committees they have to, you know, Sheriff's Department has to exist, and Health and Human Services, and they got to do their job. So it would be good to review it earlier, and I like the idea of reviewing it earlier, but I do want to make sure that, you know, every committee member, at least in their group, knows what their budget is. So when they have a review process, they only got to learn 4 other departments or 4 other committees. So that's it. Thank you.
Supervisor Ard, would you have any thoughts? I don't want to put you
Within
on.
budget processes that I have worked on with municipal budgets, the one thing that I do like to see is departments being aware of other departments. So if Health and Human Services has an extraordinarily large budget, as does transportation, we may find departments asking, why is it so large? If there is the ability, and given we're running a county, not a municipality, but if there's a possibility of department heads understanding the budgetary needs of other departments, I'd like to see that happen, because I believe it brings it brings a better understanding and appreciation of the work of each department and of all staff when we talk about budgets.
Yeah, that's a really good comment. I thought about that because, you know, for example, we review the administration budget, and it's kind of like its own silo where we now know what's going on here, but we really don't have a good sense for what's happening in Health and Human Services or Public Protection and how that all relates to the total budget until it all comes together late in the process. So I also had that thought. That was a great comment, Supervisor Ard. I'd like to ask Interim County Administrator Witt if you have thoughts or comments as you've kind of thought about this process and gone through this process in the past 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, I think when we look at the budget, and it's a constant evolution, the processes that we use. So, I mean, there'll be changes this year, next year, and every year as we continue to improve always. So one of the things when you look at the budget cycle, you have to understand the meat of it is going to be done in August, September. That's when the meat is. That's when the numbers from the state come. So any real decisions are being made there. So we know that we're locked into that time frame. I think where we have an opportunity, though, is in the budget guidelines. So that's the document that comes out in May each year And in the past, that was, I sat down with the county administrator and I said, this is everything that I've been able to see in my crystal ball. This is where health insurance premiums are going. This is what we're going to see for new position requests. This is what a step increase would cost. And I go through the cost of each of the things that I can foresee happening. And then he would say, okay, well, let's prioritize them this way. We would then come to administration and ask you to approve that. So where I can see us doing it differently is having that crystal ball talk with either the administration committee, the chairs of the standing committees as a committee of the whole, whatever group you want to have that initial talk, and then use that to develop the budget guidelines, because that drives everything else then from May through August. That's where all the instruction to the department heads is going. And so that's your best chance to put input into the beginning of the process. And it gives you an earlier understanding of the issues that we're going to be seeing as that budget gets developed. So that's your best bang for the buck in the whole process. So how would you like, because I was going to do something along those lines, but how would you like, who do you want to be the group that reviews that information?
I really like the term you used, Supervisor Cook, to have a workshop, basically, that would be after our supposed strategic planning session, that we would have the opportunity to set more policy guidelines for you. Who would be involved? I guess off the top of my head, I would suggest maybe, the entire board, just to keep everybody involved. Sometimes that can be a little challenging from a meeting standpoint, but I think from involvement of everybody, that might be advantageous. But what do you think?
Yeah, I would agree that I think the workshop should include all the supervisors, or at least they should all be invited, and so then I guess they have an option whether they think that's important for them to be involved with the budget at that point or not. But that way there's not a gap of everyone's getting kind of the same information, and so then we can take that back and as supervisors as we see fit, I guess, for the areas that we're concerned about.
Supervisor Peavy?
I just wanted to make a comment, and Supervisor Peterson remembers too. This used to be this is very simple the way we do it now and very organized. Before we had a county administrator, we would, the whole county, all the supervisors would actually do the budget in a meeting. And I think we had 26 of us then. So, 25, whatever it was an odd number. So even though to the newer members this seems fast, this is very organized, very, very, very smooth, and it really does work well compared to where we used to be. So, I like the idea of having a meeting, a workshop, rather than a committee of the whole meeting, although I'm sure Mr. Cox would have an opinion what we call it, but, to have all the supervisors here. But I don't want to get it into a point where every supervisor is doing their little budget item too, where, I want a Chevy truck and you want a Ford, and, we got to keep this on a broad level. So, I think it's a good idea, but we've went a long ways already, so.
Supervisor Peterson?
I like the idea of it being voluntary if they want to show up, all supervisors invited. And I would guess it'd be good to have the department heads maybe at that brainstorming too. That way you got a little back and forth, so.
Yeah, and I really want to emphasize that this has to be from a high-level policy standpoint, and I totally agree with you, Supervisor Peavy. We can't get into the weeds. It's not our job. So we have to keep it very high level of policy as it extends from the strategic plan. So you've got the guidance. You need to get into the weeds.
Yeah, about that strategic plan. So timing wise for it though, I've been holding off on doing it. We actually had bids to do it last March and something came up and we decided to wait. But I actually went through with a different organization a strategic planning process over the past few months and did it online, and it was a lot different. It was not engaging. And so I'm really recommending that we hold our strategic planning till we can bring them in person, we get the whole county board back. And if that means we don't start it till June and we don't finish it till September, I think you're going to come up with a better strategic plan. But we will miss the next budget cycle if we do that. So if I try to rush something from January to March, April to do it before we start this budget stuff, I mean, I can if you really want to, but it's probably going to be an online strategic planning, and I just don't know that we're going to get as much out of it. So I guess, do you have a preference on that?
Supervisor Peterson?
I guess I don't feel we actually need to have that strategic plan to have a brainstorming session per se. I think your gist is that we need to kind of have some input or at least some dialogue on what's going on, but I don't feel that we need to be, at this point, tied down to a strategic plan. I wouldn't maybe let that be a deal breaker.
Yeah, I guess if we're going to do a strategic plan, we better do it right. And if that means it doesn't exactly coincide with the current budget cycle, well, then so be it, because we got to make sure we do it right.
Yeah.
So,
And I'm looking for a strategic plan, even maybe longer term than what our last one was. Our last one had been a 3-year plan. I'm actually looking at potentially a 5-year plan. But what I want is, I want issues that are big issues, not something that, it can be solved in a month. It's issues that, where is the county going? What is the strategic plan as a big idea for the county? What are the main things that we're trying to accomplish? So that's how I see strategic planning. And then when we get to the annual budget pieces, okay, is this piece moving us in that direction for that strategic issue? So that's where it will come in handy in the future. I just want you to be realistic about where I am in the different processes and how they might not quite coincide for at least this first year.
everybody okay with that?
Yes.
Are there any other ideas? And I would agree that I think the budget process went really smoothly this year, and that's really a good thing. So we have to make sure that we leverage what's gone well. Yes, Supervisor Cook.
My other comment is not well, it's connected to the budget process, but it's almost more of an outcome. I would, and this probably would pull Adam into this, but I think the county has an opportunity to be more transparent about our budget itself. I mean, I know we have it on our website, but there's a lot of communities that do a really nice job of, creating visuals on where the money is being spent. You can easily get to it without searching through documents to find it. And I would like to see us have a process where that we can easily communicate that going forward, and where our citizens can easily see where their money is being spent.
There was another idea, and I'm not sure I'm 100% sold on it myself. I've seen other communities do it, though. They actually take a piece of the budget and they allocate it for a citizen idea. And so they say, we're going to take 10,000 or we're going to take 100,000 out of the budget, and we're going to give you maybe some parameters of what it can be used for. But whatever the citizen group that shows up that day and wants to review everything and vote on stuff, that's how we're going to spend that pot of money. But that's a great way to educate the public. The ones that want to be involved can be involved, and it gives them some buy-in into the budget. So that's one trick or idea that's out there. So if that's something you guys would be interested in, we could look at doing that. It's having a lot of faith in who shows up that day.
Ken, do they have to be lawful expenditures of the county? Is that one criteria?
They would. You have to establish parameters. So you might say, we have 5 ideas for you. You have to stay within these 5 ideas. But how do you prioritize it? So if it's $100,000, do you say, we're going to add a sheriff's deputy, we're going to do a park improvement, we're going to do a social work program? how would you spend $100,000 if we had $100,000 to spend? What's your priority? And we're willing to live with whichever one you pick.
Could be dangerous.
That's how come I have just a little bit of apprehension about it, yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's actually a lot to be discussed when we get to the survey with regard to transparency in the budget and whatnot too. So I think we're not done with that discussion yet. Sorry, Adam. Okay, are there any other comments any other ideas or suggestions that we want to throw out, at least at this point, regarding the budget process?
So just to recap, what I'm going to do then is I will schedule in probably late March, maybe early April, probably late March, I think would be a better time frame. A committee of the whole, we'll classify it as a workshop, a voluntary workshop to attend, but technically speaking, it'll be a committee of the whole. I will arrange for the department heads to be there. We'll kind of address number 3, that deep dive, where we talk a little bit about, I'll have the departments talk about what their future issues might be that are coming up. We will talk about what things I know are going to happen or potentially could happen. Where do I see health insurance? What is the cost of a step increase? What we think we might see for new position requests. And the result of that workshop, what I need from that then is the priorities. So how does the county board prioritize all these things that we talked about? What's the priority? And I will develop a budget guideline from that, which I'll bring back at the May meeting for approval, and then that's the instructions for the department heads to create their budget request. That sound like a good summary of where we're going?
Sounds good to me.
Supervisor Peavy?
Yep, just to, and it, it's hard to differ for most people to differentiate. I can't remember, what about a quarter of our budget is state and federal funds that are allocated for certain departments, so, is that correct, about the right number?
Yes, it is.
Like for the highways, 60% of it is actually comes from somebody else and goes to somebody else, so you're only dealing with, about 40% of it, so that's everybody's got to be aware of that as they go through the budget process, and it is very confusing at times that, I think a highway worker, 60% of his time he's on the state and federal system, he gets paid by the state, and then 40% he's on the county system, and then you need somebody, that we control, so it does get to be, a confusing issue to some point, and I think an early committee of the whole or workshop would be a great idea, way to start.
Yeah, a lot of the budget is, there isn't any flexibility in it. I mean, the money's coming from a source and it's for a specified source, so it's already spoken for. There's large sections of the budget that I'm just going to tell you, that's the way it's going to be. I mean, we're required by state law, and that's what we have to do, and these are the expenses that they're going to be. There's really a fairly small percentage of the budget that you have very much flexibility with.
And it might be good to carve those out, and those are the things that we would really focus on in a workshop, what we have control over. Yeah, great point. Yeah. Okay, any other comments or suggestions? Ken, do you feel like you have some little bit direction on maybe some possible changes? Okay. And then the last item, as I mentioned earlier, the survey results that we got. We have, we can, review that while we're celebrating over the holidays, a little light reading when you go to bed at night. And then we'll come back and have that on the agenda for a full discussion in our January meeting. And speaking of our January meeting, any requests for future agenda items? Okay, doesn't look like we do. Any announcements, correspondence? Okay. Well, it's 7:50 or 6:50, sorry. Getting ahead of myself. And the meeting is adjourned. And our next meeting will be January 19th, 2021, which will be a much better year than 2020. Thank you all.